and this is the final video, 3 of week 5, on the concept of culture. As I mentioned before, postmodernism, or the postmodern period in anthropology, was associated with reflexivity. Reflexivity involves writing in a way that forefronts the anthropologist's positionality in the field and interaction with the informants. And again, it's this idea that, like with any instrument of inquiry, you have to understand the instrument itself, and you have to sort of adjust your understanding of the data, or calibrate it, or sort of calibrate the instrument in a way. So again, the idea that an anthropologist's positionality will affect the collection of data, the interpretation of data, and even the way that person interacts with the informants and the people who give that data. Now, this has kind of been used in a couple of different ways by anthropologists that I want to discuss now. The first is Laila Abu-Lughod, a cultural anthropologist, an extremely influential one at Columbia University. And Abu-Lughod is Palestinian American. Her father's Palestinian, her mother is American, a well-known sociologist. And Abu-Lughod did field work in the Middle East. So she decided she wanted to work in Egypt among the Bedouin, who are kind of the indigenous, autochthonous peoples of much of the Middle East, kind of known as the nomads who herded camels around the desert. And there are extant communities of those in Egypt and some other countries. And so she wanted to go and work with them. And so already her positionality mattered from the very beginning, because the way she made entree into the community is that her father, an Arab man, accompanied her to Egypt and introduced her and said to them, you know, you're Arab, I'm an Arab man, I'm bringing my daughter to come and live and work among you. I'm here to officially introduce her. Please make her welcome. And then they did. So even before her fieldwork began, her positionality mattered. And she wrote a couple of books. Veiled Sentiments is often assigned in classes here, so you might come across it. And then she wrote an article called A Tale of Two Pregnancies, which I want to discuss now. And so A Tale of Two Pregnancies starts out with her talking about, as she was studying Bedouin women, how many pregnancies she got to experience. And so she described the activities of women to get pregnant and to be pregnant and then to give birth. And, you know, the kind of superstitions that they engaged in, the spiritual acts that they believed in, such as going to some kind of wise man and getting like a text from the Quran to roll up and wear on them as an amulet. They, would put locks or strings on the bars outside of the tombs of saints, because it was believed that by doing that they could get some of the barakah, or the blessing of the saint, and that would give them fertility. And she talked about, while they were pregnant, you know, how they fretted and were anxious over their pregnancy, hoping everything would turn out okay, how they took measures to make themselves as healthy as possible, how they prepared for delivery, how they prepared to have a child come into their home. And then she talked about actually giving birth and the women who would gather around, and how the mother, after giving birth, would get several days of rest while everyone else took care of her and brought her food. And so she described all these processes. And then she fast forwarded to later in her life when she herself was pregnant. And so she and her husband, in New York City, they had faced infertility, so they had gone to a fertility clinic. They had seen doctors, they had taken hormones, they had gone through procedures, and they had finally gotten pregnant with twins. And while she was pregnant, they had fretted over the pregnancy, worried about it. She had, read what she should be eating, and she tried to eat right and exercise right and take care of herself. And then when it was time to give birth, she gave birth in the hospital. And there was an expectation that her family would gather around her and people would help take care of her. And she says at the end of the day, whether you're a Bedouin woman or a woman in New York City, in these vastly different contexts, a pregnant woman is kind of a pregnant woman. I mean, in both contexts, in all contexts, we do what we can to get pregnant. While we're pregnant, we're fretting and anxious about it. We're doing everything we can to be healthy. And then we give birth and people come and take care of us and we take the baby home. So a pregnant woman is a pregnant woman. And when we say that culture matters, maybe we over signify how much culture matters. So, to me, this is not the way Abu-Lughod says it. This is me saying it. Is there such a thing as culture, and how do we study it? Do we study it wrongly? And then also, is culture really just the new race? So if we go back to our definition of race as this powerful social and cultural category that, while having no actual counterpart in human biology, still is used to differentiate groups of people based on observable physical characteristics and their presumed relationships to behavioral differences. Don't we do the same thing with culture? Isn't it also a social and cultural category that, while having no actual counterpart in human life or society, still differentiates groups of people based on observable societal characteristics such as language, religion, etc., and their presumed relationships to cultural difference? So, in other words, do we falsely divide the world into Moroccan, American, Bedouin, Arab, and things like that, when actually people are just people and they look more alike than they do different? Or, Abu-Lughod asked, are there better ways to divide people? So maybe should we, instead of studying these societies and ethnic groups, should we study societies currently in conflict, or post-conflict societies, or desert societies versus rainforest societies? Or she didn't say that exactly. This is, again, me sort of interpreting what she meant. So, do we make culture matter when it really shouldn't? And so, should we get rid of the concept of culture, or stop applying it to explain things that can't be explained through culture? So she used this version of postmodernism to write very story-like works along the lines of interpretive anthropology, where she kind of told her audience people's stories and just left the audience to interpret those for themselves. And into those stories, she put lots of description, lots of possibilities for how those cultural beliefs and practices could be carried out. She just kind of tried to kind of present them and not say, this is Bedouin culture, or this is Egyptian culture, or this is Arab culture, but just leave all of that up to the audience. So that's her version of postmodernism. Paul Rabinow, the author of the book you're reading this week, came up with something else. Another way of applying postmodernism to his work. And to get into this, let's talk about his notion of intersubjectivity. So for him, fieldwork is a process of intersubjective construction. Intersubjective means literally more than one subject, so two subjects or more subjects sort of interrelating to each other. But for him, the important part is the subjects involved do not share a common set of assumptions, experiences, or tradition. So Paul Rabinow is an American, and he's in the field doing field work among Moroccans. And because one is American and one is Moroccan, they do not share a common set of assumptions, experiences, or traditions. And that has to affect every moment of field work. So as you read the book, I want you to look for this. It's really essentially a story of him and his informants one at a time, and what they're learning from each other and how they're misunderstanding each other and understanding each other. Let's just look at a couple of examples. Be sure and read the guide for this week to figure out what you must read but don't have to read in the book. But on page 30, he writes, Ibrahim and I were from different cultures, and the implications which we drew in Marrakesh about daily life were leagues apart. Okay, so here he's saying the opposite of Abu-Lughod. He's saying culture matters. And the way we saw the world was different because we were from these two different cultures. The next quote on page 39. But with Ali there began to merge a mutually constructed ground of experience and understanding, a realm of tenuous common sense which was constantly breaking down, being patched up and re-examined, first here, then there. And you can see from this quote that he's arguing it's possible for these two different people from two different cultures to merge a mutual understanding. But we have to understand that that mutual understanding is tenuous. It's easily broken apart. It's easily patched up. But it's never a perfect understanding. Okay, and then finally, towards the end of the book, on page 148, Rabinow concludes, I had a strong sense of being American. I knew it was time to leave Morocco. Okay, so you see at the end of this journey, he finally decides, I'm American. And that's different from being Moroccan. And at some level, we will never be able to fully understand each other because we come from these different cultures. As you can see, that's the complete opposite conclusion from that of Abba Lugod. And they're both using postmodernism and the ideas of postmodernism and reflexivity to reach those very different conclusions, which I think is very interesting. So, as you read the Rabinow book, I want you to be asking yourself, how is he building up to this final statement? I had a strong sense of being American. I knew it was time to leave Morocco. How did he get there and why? And what does that say for his notion of field work and the role of the anthropologist?